Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk story creation. Drake is an award-winning fantasy novelist and creative writing teacher. You can find his epic fantasy series, The Genesis Oblivion, on Kindle Vella. Marie runs a fantasy world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and her first book, The Hidden Blade, is available on Kindle Unlimited. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon. Today, we're going to edit somebody else's work that they've sent to us. So somebody took us up on our offer and sent us 1,000 words, and we're going to go through it and publish it as part of this podcast. Now, a couple of things. We have altered names where we found them, and we have altered fantasy words where we could figure out what they meant and replaced them with kind of generic fantasy terms. This was just to protect the anonymity of the author and obviously their proprietary IP so that it doesn't just become part of the public domain. And if you send us your 1,000 words, we will obviously do the same for your work.
So this is going to be an interesting discussion because like when we did yours early on, we really kind of took a line editing approach. And I think this one, and there's plenty to line edit in this if we wanted to go down that path, but in, looking this over, I think there's a bigger opportunity to look at some larger concepts. I think there's a lot of opportunities to really talk about some higher level concepts as we go through here.
If I look a little weird in that, that's because I'm really close to my camera. Okay.
Let's go through it like we did yours and go through it one paragraph at a time.
So the first paragraph is, Jane rode into town on a temperamental mechanical mount who liked nothing better than stomping on heads. Star loved bursting them like melons, and the psychic bond Jane had with her construct brought forth a ravenous bile for slaughter. Constructs were like that, bloodthirsty, yet holding the animal ignorance of morality. Despite the rain, people thronged the muddy streets, and the horse's urge to stomp down upon children didn't overpower her need to follow commands. Jane would never allow her to do something like that, even though small and helpless were Star's favorite target.
So again, I don't really want to talk about line editing in here. And some of the things that I would be doing, there's a lot of there's a lot of info dump. But here's the thing. This feels to me, and we don't know, we're coming at this blind, so we don't know exactly where this would fit. But it feels to me like this would be, at the very least, the opening of a chapter, but more than likely, the absolute opening of a novel. Because you get that with I don't know that she's riding a mechanical horse yet, and I don't know, the horse's, temperament and all this other stuff. So it really does feel to me like that. And that's, I think, where I have the biggest problem with this. Opening sentences, opening paragraphs are always one of the hardest things to master, and something that you really need to spend extra time with, because there's a lot that has to happen in that opening paragraph, or at the very least, the opening two paragraphs. You might get that. You'll definitely get that from a reader. From a reader, you might even get the whole first page, because readers are a little less jaded than, let's say, an industry person like me or an agent or a publisher. Those guys, sometimes they will get rid of you on the first word, the opening word, and they're like, out. One of the most vital things to do, and I love how you said this, Marie, before we started recording this, you had said it needs to make the reader ask a question. Yeah. And that is a great way to kind of think about that, because, and the question can be whatever, but really it kind of boils down to me of, oh, that's interesting. What's going to happen with this? That driving force of wanting to learn more is vitally important. It's hard to do in the opening sentence, and I get that. Some people can, and not even some people. I've done it beautifully in some stories and not quite as beautifully in other stories, but maybe the second sentence or whatever made up for it because I needed a little bit more time for whatever. That's the big thing for me in this. This whole first paragraph is an info dump. It's a world building info dump of things. Also, the weirdest thing about it is it doesn't even focus on the narrator. It's almost exclusively focusing on the horse and what the horse likes, what the horse dislikes, what the horse desires, what the horse, all of this stuff about the horse, but the horse is not the narrating character.
Yeah.
So it's a really weird place to start, in my opinion.
At the end of this paragraph, I know more about what Star, the horse, wants
Yes.
than what Jane wants. I have more reason to follow Star as a POV character in her desire to burst children's heads open than I do to follow Jane as a character in her desire to do, I'm not entirely certain what.
And that's kind of the problem. And I'm going to jump ahead here, but that's the problem. In this 1,000 words, these first 3 pages, that doesn't change.
Yeah.
At the end of the 3 pages, the end of the 1,000 words that you've now forced the reader to slog through, I still don't know what Jane is wanting to do. I don't know her motivations. I don't know why she's here, what her conflict is, what the driving force is of why I'm following Jane. Even some of the most lenient readers, if they get all the way to that 3rd paragraph and they still don't feel like there's this call to action to make me continue reading, I see a lot of readers putting this book down at this point. And, we're in this world of the free download where you can, even professionally published stuff, you can download the first couple of pages. So it just goes to, that's even more important, because I haven't. So if I download the Look Inside from Kindle on this, I haven't bought it. I haven't paid anything for this. So I read these first 3 pages and I go, yeah, there's nothing really, I don't care. And so I'm just gonna go, okay, well, I wasted 5 minutes. I'll just go to something else.
And the odd thing is, there are some very interesting elements here. The way that constructs work in this world with their psychic bond with who they're riding with, and the fact that constructs are living enough to desire amoral things like slaughter, like they have to be controlled. That's interesting. It is an interesting concept.
It's an interesting world building device.
And some of the things later down, like, it's interesting over here that we have religions set up with different cults. So that implies that there's multiple religious aspects. So you have all kinds of temple politics potential. And there's reference to like merchants being richer than nobles, which is also interesting because that sets up political dimensions and conflicts between, the economic class and the authoritative military class. So there's a lot of potential here, but nothing makes me care about that.
And as I always say, why is that? Because the story is not about those things.
Yeah.
You need those things. And again, just like you said,
in fantasy,
the writer,
you have to have those things.
Right.
Like
the writer did a great job of world building. But what they've missed here is that the story is not about your world. Your world is not going to have a thematic element. Your world is not going to be something that I relate to, that I follow, that I care about. Jane is who I'm following. Jane is who you have to make me care about. And then I will learn all of this cool world building stuff as Jane experiences it through the world. Yeah. When you just info dump it all at me, all you're doing is an encyclopedia of world building. And I don't care about any of that. None of that is a humanizing, story motivating, reason for me to continue reading this and following Jane.
If I was going to be a player in your world, like a D&D player or something like that, then this would be very interesting to me. But as a reader, I need to be invested in the character.
Right. Not the world.
Not the world.
The world always takes second place to the character.
Yeah.
Character is who you have to connect the reader to. And if you fail to do that, if you fail to make me care about the character and care about their conflict. And again, when I'm talking about setting up a conflict in the beginning, it's never the conflict of the story because the inciting incident hasn't even happened. And the inciting incident is what's going to then make me, want to continue and drive to all the way to the end of it. But during your setup phase, you still have to have conflict. You still have to have something that makes me go, ooh, this is, I really, if I was this person, what would I be doing in this? How would I be handling this? Let's keep reading to find out how Jane handles it. Yeah. And there's literally nothing in here that not just in the opening paragraph, but there's literally nothing in here in the first 3 pages. It's all very interesting world building stuff. And I don't want to detract from that.
Yeah.
But world building is not a story.
No.
World building is a role-playing game. We're writing stories. And so we have to understand that it's about connecting the reader to Jane and Jane's current conflict. What is Jane dealing with right now? You have to connect me with that so that I actually care about learning that she's on a mechanical mount and the mechanical mount wants to kill children. And the only reason why it doesn't is because Jane stops it, and that there's cults and politics and merchants and all this other stuff. I won't care about any of that if I don't care about Jane. You know, another big problem that I have is that 4th word. Jane rode into town. We do get a little bit of description about the town as the story goes on, but literally what you're doing with this opening 4 words is you're relying on the reader to basically paint a generic fantasy town that's not personal to Jane, and that's not personal to the world. Because what is the image that I'm going to pop into my head? Is it going to be what this town actually looks like? No, there's not a chance in Hades that you telling a reader Jane rode into town and that reader imagining the town that you think actually exists here. One of the things about writing is if you don't give details, it doesn't matter. The reader will put details on it. So the example I always use is the color of a character's head. So let's say you write 2 novels of Drake, and you've written Drake, and he's been your hero through these 2 novels. And then halfway through the 3rd book, you write the line, and then Drake ran his hair through his fingers through his flaming red hair. If the 3rd book is the first time you've given me this detail, you're going to blow my mind, because maybe I put red hair on Drake, but more than likely, since red hair is a very minor trait in the human equation, more than likely your reader has blonde hair or brown hair, sandy blonde hair or black hair or whatever, and they're going to automatically paint that in with something else. And then you're going to break their imagination when you change it.
This town is entirely where the scene takes place. So it deserves a little bit more than Jane rode into town.
Right. It does, 100%. You have to understand the world didn't pop into existence when Jane rode into town. The world has been here forever, and it will be here forevermore. This story of Jane just happens to be when you turn the camera on. So we snap record on the camera as Jane is riding into town. The reason why I think it's so important to think about it in that light and to think about it differently is you, in your mind, as the writer, can see everything. You can see that it's raining. You can see that there's muddy streets. You can see that it's a town. It has these type of buildings. It has these type of people. They're dressed like this and all this. And the reason why I feel like it's so important to think like this is because if I'm looking at the scene as a camera, so that's what I am as the writer, I'm the camera, I'm going to go, okay, what's the coolest or interesting or kind of the most noticeable thing? And so to me, if I'm going to start a scene off with the main character in the rain, I might start with that. I might start with the, rain pelted Jane's leather hood.
She's wearing a fancy hat somewhere.
Right. But you don't get that until later too.
No, but that's what I'm saying. So it would be a cool paragraph it would be a cool sentence to go like, rain pelted on Jane's fancy
as
hat.
she hunched over her mount or whatever. I mean, I hate writing out of my mouth, so I have to be in her saddle, whatever.
She hunched over her saddle.
Although, and again, this is just me being a native English speaker and you being so brilliant that you speak way more language than me. I would probably put rain pelted off Jane's fancy hat. It just, to me, paints a picture that's actually splashing or whatever. That's a minor little thing. So what we're doing here is we understand the limitations of prose, and the limitations of prose is I get one word that leads to a second word that leads to a third word, and I have to paint a picture. The picture that I'm painting is Jane riding into town, but I can't do it in that one. Now, after I build the world and after I've described things, if this is chapter 17, absolutely, we've been to this town a million times and you can absolutely write something like this. We're talking about, again, this feels like the opening. the absolute first time we're meeting Jane, the absolute first time we're meeting mechanical mounts in this town and everything else. And so I want to make sure that I paint that picture. And then, so this is what, another thing I teach when I'm talking about scene openings, I always say you can only open scenes in one of two ways. You can open them macro or you can open them micro. If you open the macro, you're going to start big and work small. If you start small, you're going to start small and work big. Yeah. So the example I always use for my macro is Drake cast his gaze out over the vast jungle canopy. And the reason why, even though that's generic, it isn't. Jungle always paints the same picture in everyone's mind. I don't care what part of the world you're from.
Town's different because a town can
we don't even know the year. We don't know the architecture. We don't know. I mean, there's just so much that town is just too generic.
Yeah, town could be a collection of mud and wattle huts.
It could be glass. It could be glass and metal. We don't know. It's just so generic. And so I think that's, I don't think I'm a hypocrite saying that, the vast jungle canopy. And then I would start working closer. So I might describe a flock of local birds, or I might describe the sky, or I might describe a distant waterfall. And I'm going to keep bringing it in and in and in until the camera's with Drake on the balcony, showing that he's looking out over this and then going into that.
But you can also start with
micro.
So
yeah,
when I started Louis's first chapter in Ducal Air, I started with Louis embracing his daughter. And it was very, very small, a very small moment just between the two of them. And then I built out from there and said, they're on a frozen lake and there's a fire and there's more people and there's a festival going on.
And so that's what we've kind of done here with the rain pelted off of Jane's fancy hat. We're starting with one thing. Now, is this the right thing? Because, going back to what I said earlier is your opening sentence should attempt to create a question.
Yes.
That's especially if you're trying to sell it to the industry. So if you're selling it to the industry, rain pelted off Jane's fancy hat may not be the best approach.
No.
If you're selling this to a reader, you absolutely have more time than the opening sentence. Readers aren't going to go, why do I give a crap about rain pelting off a fancy hat? I'm out. They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
They're going to give you, even jaded readers like me are going to give you the first paragraph. You really need to have within the first two paragraphs, maybe three at the most, but absolutely somewhere on that first page, you have to have that. Oh my gosh, that's really interesting. I wonder how they're going to deal with this. Let me find out.
There is really a second sentence we can put here that ties back into at least some kind of conflict, because she is miserable. She's being rained on. She is bored. We know that deeper on. So, and we know that she's got a psychic connection with a mount who wants to stamp on people's heads.
Right. Yeah. So, was not helped by the fact that
by Star, by her mounts.
Yeah, because we don't know Star is a mount yet. So yeah.
So at least that gives you a second sentence to build onto your second sentence, that you do have the paragraph.
So for our podcast listeners that can't see this because they're not watching this on YouTube.
Yeah.
So we have the sentence, rain pelted off Jane's fancy hat as she hunched over her saddle. And then Marie just added, her miserable bored mood was not helped by her mount's desire to rampage over the good citizens of the small hamlet. Now, I don't like this because this to me is a POV shift. How does Jane know that her mount has the desire to rampage over the good citizens? So I would probably do something like her miserable bored mood was not helped by her mount's desire to rampage over the good citizens of the small hamlet bleeding through their psychic connection, or maybe there's a way to rework the sentence so that the psychic connection comes before the mount's desire. Either way, but to avoid, to make sure that I'm not POV shifting, that I'm still in Jane's head, even though I'm now in the mount's head, it's because Jane's head is connected to mount's head.
Yes.
And then the reason why she didn't write Star here is because we don't know that it's a mount, or we don't know that Star is a mount. So you don't want to start with the name before you qualify it. Somewhere soon, I would write, she dug her heels into Star's flanks, or she reached out and petted Star's neck, or whatever. And then because you've done that in close proximity, the readers go, oh, she's riding a mount. I get that. Everybody can see that. Oh, Star is the mount's name. And then at some point is where I would start bringing in the coolness of the fact that this is mechanical. So this first sentence, Jane rode into town on a temperamental mechanical mount who liked nothing better than stomping on heads. So this is all just information. It's all just facts. It's all just tell. There's nothing organic about it. You're just like, hey, reader, swallow this information, even though you don't really care about any of it. The crazy thing is that it's repeated in a couple paragraphs. If you scroll down to, I think, the third paragraph. So first of all, so the subtle clicks and whirls sounded beneath her fabricated skin, or Star's fabricated skin, emitting the sounds of machinery and the dull hum of the earth magic, bringing it to life. That is a great way to tell me that this is a showy way to bring it. So I wouldn't write the first line at all. I would just take this beautifully showy line and move it up there and use this as your description to say, hey, the mount's mechanical, by the way, just letting you know this.
Okay, so what I added was Jane dug her heels into Star's flanks, and then as a new sentence, subtle clicks and whirls sounded beneath her fabricated skin, emitting the sound of machinery and the dull hum of earth magic, bringing it to life.
So this is a great time to talk about pronouns. Pronouns always point back to the last proper noun. So right now, this her, subtle clicks and whirls sounded beneath her fabricated skin. That actually points back to Jane, because it doesn't point back to Star, because Star is not in the sentence before it. Star's flanks are in the sentence. So technically, and we are getting nitpicky here, because maybe no one would stumble over that, but I'm very picky about my pronouns. So technically the her can't point back to Star's flanks, because Star's flanks aren't a her. They're not a proper, character. So it has to go back to Jane. So even though we're repeating Star twice, sometimes you have to do that just to make sure that you're not, losing the reader or confusing the reader or whatever. Or we can rewrite and readjust to try to get rid of the double stars in two different paragraphs. So there's all sorts of ways to work on that, but definitely the her would part back to Jane, and Jane doesn't have whirling sounds beneath her fabricated skin.
I like this better as a paragraph because it gives us the same information, more or less, but it gives it to us in a more showy way.
And we still don't know what the town looks like.
No, we still don't know what
However, the town isn't the focus. So when you open up Jane rode into town, you're now making me build this town in my imagination. The way you have this, you're not, even though you have small hamlet in there, I'm not focused on the small hamlet. I'm focused on good citizens. And so that's a less generic noun for me to make up what it looks like. And you're not going to really hurt me as you start putting clothes on them and giving me their garb and their mannerisms and everything like that. Whereas rode into town. Rode into town is this huge generic thing that I'm going to have to now struggle through. Whereas this, it's still, even though it's generic as in the good citizens of the small hamlet, you're not focusing on the small hamlet yet. I'm focusing on the good citizens and the fact that the mount is trying to kill them. Like in the first paragraph, where it's all about Star's desire to kill people. The sentence that you have written up in here is about her mood not being enhanced by her mount's desire to kill people. So it's always about her. What is she feeling? How is she reacting? Why does it matter to her? We're not just in the mount's desire to kill things. We're in her desire that the mount is actually making her just as miserable as the rain is. And now that connects me deeper to Jane and not to the horse. So a lot to unpack here, but hopefully you can see the difference between these two paragraphs, where one is very telly, very info dump heavy, a lot of information that the reader just doesn't care about yet. And the new paragraph is much more personal. Now we actually have a conflict. There is a conflict in this first paragraph. Yeah. I am miserable. I don't want to be miserable. Everything is just adding to my misery. Now we can relate. Now we can go, oh, I've been miserable before. I must be just like Jane. I can, let's see how Jane gets out of this. I know how I got out of it when I was miserable, but let's find out. And even though it's a really small thing, it's still something, it's still that hook, that desire to continue reading because there is conflict in this paragraph where there's no conflict in the first paragraph. And yeah, you could say, well, wait a minute, there's conflict because the horse wants to kill people. But that's not Jane's conflict.
No, that's the horse's conflict.
And you could say, well, Jane has conflict, but she would never allow the horse to do that. That's not conflict. That's control.
Yeah. She's controlling it, and she's not conflicted because she would never allow it.
Right. This separates really good storytelling from, let me just tell you about my world. Last night at the writers group, a new member was defending some of her writing, because they were like, one of the critiquers was like, why did this character do this? I don't understand. And she goes, because it's what I would do. And I'm like, okay, but this character's not you. And the funny thing is this is not the narrating character. This is one of the secondary characters. And then later on, there was 3 characters in this scene. And later on, somebody said something about the second secondary character, and she said the same thing, because it's what I would do. And then later on, somebody questioned something about the main character, and she said the same thing. So I'm like, so basically, you have a scene with one character, with a 3-way split personality, because they're all you. The reason why this plays in, the reason why I went down that rabbit chase to kind of bring it back to here is, writing prose and creating stories, you have to think different than what you think storytelling is about. And I write role-playing games. I was a lead fiction writer for EverQuest Next from Sony. It's not like I haven't been down those paths, but you have to think different when you're writing a prose story. It's all about, and sometimes it sounds jaded or whatever, but it's all about misdirection and deceiving your readers into caring about stuff so that you can get this other stuff to them. But if you miss that thing where you connect the reader to the character and their plight, their conflict, and that conflict is obviously like in this opening paragraph now, this new opening paragraph, the conflict is her being miserable. That conflict is not going to drive the story. It's not even going to drive this scene, but it is going to drive the reader to read the next paragraph. Yeah. It is going to drive the reader to go, ooh, where's this going? This is interesting to me. This is what we have to think about as writers. We have to think differently. And then again, it goes back to what I said earlier. You also have to live by the limitation of prose. One word leads to the second word, leads to the third word, leads to the fourth word, leads to the first sentence, leads to the second sentence, leads to the first paragraph, leads to the second paragraph, leads to the scene. That is a mantra you should be drilling into your head, because there's no way to break it. You can't fix that limitation.
So let's read this new first paragraph and then the second paragraph. Rain pelted off Jane's fancy hat as she hunched over her saddle. Her miserable, bored mood was not helped by her mount's desire to rampage over the good citizens of the small hamlet, bleeding through their psychic connection. Jane dug her heels into Star's flanks. Subtle clicks and whirls sounded beneath Star's fabricated skin, emitting the sound of machinery and the dull hum of earth magic, bringing it to life. There was no reason for people to be out in this miserable weather unless it was a special day. Jane didn't recall any holidays this month, and she'd know. An execution, then. That must have been it. Everyone loved an execution, even her. At least this grisly hamlet would provide entertainment.
As I've said many times on this podcast, if you're not an avid user of OneLook.com, you are missing the best thesaurus that exists, because it's not an actual thesaurus. It's an AI that comes up with anything that could possibly relate to what you're trying to do. So we have miserable in the first paragraph. We added that. So the reader didn't have that. So the writer didn't have this. So it's not a double. They don't have the 2 words. But now that we've changed this, we now have miserable. So I went to OneLook.com. I went to their related words, which is their thesaurus, and I typed in miserable, and I get wretched, woeful, pitiful, pathetic, abject, pitiable, poor, hapless, deplorable, unhappy, sad, meager, misfortunate, paltry. And there's literally hundreds and hundreds.
I like wretched because it gives us a W. It gives us a WW, which is always, a little bit of alliteration is always nice. It just rolls off the tongue.
Wretched weather.
Wretched weather.
Yeah. And so a part of our job is to do that. I always follow, when I talk about thesauruses, I always follow this with a caveat, a couple caveats. First of all, don't use a word in your thesaurus that you don't know, because you're going to use a word that doesn't mean what you think it means.
A critiquer once said to me, if you drive me to the dictionary
Right.
to look up what the word means, you start losing me as a reader.
Yeah.
So if you use the most obscure language you know, and not that this reader did that, it's just that we've, gone down that. They haven't done that at all. They've used nicely accessible language, but it is a rabbit hole that you should be aware of, because I do see fantasy authors using what somebody called a $10 word. I can't remember who said this, but they were like, woof, that's a $10 word.
Yeah. I always like why use a small word when a diminutive word would suffice? Remember, adult fantasy or adult fiction writing should be written at a 4th grade reading level. That is not an insult. People hit these weird words and they're like, well, I don't want to go look this word up, and they're using them all over the place, and it's kind of spoiling. So screw it. There's a billion other things I can read right now. And so they just move on. So you do want to write in that 4th grade reading level, because then it doesn't throw them out of the story. It doesn't make them have to work to try and decide what the crap you're trying to show them, because that's what you're doing. You're painting a picture for them. And if the word doesn't paint the picture, then they don't know what you're doing and they're lost.
Yeah.
But you do need to use the thesaurus, because you can't use miserable throughout the entire thing. One of my writers early on, who listens to the podcast, so he's going to know who I'm talking about. But he had massive in this one thing that he brought, I swear to God, like 15 times in 3 pages. The massive this and the massive that. And it was massive, and it was really funny. And we picked on him. But you do want to vary it. You do want that adjustment, but you want words like wretched. Everyone knows what miserable means. Everyone knows what wretched means. They both work really well. They both really paint the picture of the weather being horrible. So we're going to use miserable in one case and wretched in the other. And we're still at that 4th grade reading level, and but it's still different. And so we're not using the same word over and over again and boring our readers. And so OneLook.com, I cannot stress it enough. OneLook.com, and then you click on the related words button. Every day I'm writing, OneLook is open, always. The example I use in my class is, say, Drake hit the wall, Drake bashed the wall, Drake thwacked the wall, Drake punched the wall. All of those mean the same thing, and you can see all of them. But if I wrote the line, Drake percussed the wall, I'm out. It still technically is accurate, but unless the wall isn't a giant drum and he's actually making noise, if you write the word Drake percussed the wall when you just mean that I got angry and punched the wall, I'm out. I will never read anything you write ever again. I'm done. That's the one thing. And that was just that. But now, not only that, one of the cool things about this is it's a mini callback. And I love writing callbacks. So not only is she miserable because of the rain, the next paragraph is continuing to push that theme. There was no reason for people to be out in this wretched weather. And this is personal to her. Obviously, the people out in the weather don't feel that way. Always make everything personal to the POV. The next sentence is really weird, because this is weird double negative. Jane didn't recall, but she did know. It's a weird kind of, she didn't recall any holidays this month, but she did know. Not that it is incorrect. It's just weird to have a negative and then a positive in the same sentence.
It does read a bit funny. Just
a minor little thing. The thing that we talked about a lot before we started recording, I do want to kind of touch on here, because this is where it started for us. The line, everyone loved an execution, even her. When you start showing the personality of your character, you have to understand that it's going to impact the reader either positively or negatively. So me, as a guy who doesn't read grimdark, as a guy who doesn't like following villains, for me, if I'm reading this story and I get to the point where I go, everyone loved an execution, even her, I'm going to be like, yeah, I don't, so I can't relate to you anymore. And then when you say, the grisly Hamlet would provide entertainment, that means that she enjoys watching people get slaughtered. And that's going to push me further away from her. And again, this is subjective. So I'm not saying this is wrong in this story. Yeah. What I'm saying is that by stating this stuff, you are going to get a reaction out of your readers. If it's the reaction you're looking for, then great. And the reason why I bring this up is one time, this was a couple years ago in one of my private writers groups. The way I work my private writers group is somebody reads, and then we go around the room and everyone critiques, and I'm always last. So this one person read the scene where it's this brother and sister on a farm, and they're doing this thing. It's an opening chapter kind of setup thing and they're kind of just having a weird thing between them, just you would think like brother and sister. And it goes around and everybody kind of critiques it and everything like that. And it gets to me and I was like, okay, so the brother and sister, they're shagging. And the writer was like, what? I'm like, they are absolutely boning. 100%. And everyone else was like, oh my God, thank you for saying that. They absolutely are 100%. And the writer was appalled. She was like, what do you mean? I'm like, look at the flirting that they're doing. It is so sexually charged that it is creepy as crap. It's George Martin.
Jamie and Cersei.
Incest boning. And the writer was like, that is not, oh my goodness, I totally didn't see that I was writing it like this. I was just like, no, they're just brother and sister. I'm like, look, this is sexually charged. This is sexually, and all the others are like, yes, I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to say it. But of course, I'm going to say, I'm the brutal guy, so I'm going to say whatever.
Yeah.
So the reason why I bring this up, maybe this writer wants this character, Jane, to kind of be a despicable person that revels in death. And it also, to me, goes against the original first paragraph where she's like, I'd never allow my horse to kill children, but God, do I love watching people die.
For me, when we read that, and now reading it again, it was the first thought that actually occurred to me is, this is such a contradiction. Just a paragraph ago, you were telling me that you would never let the horse rampage. In the next paragraph, you're telling me that Jane loves watching people get executed. And I mean, we're talking about a medieval execution, and that's borne out later down.
Yeah, because later down, she even says she doesn't know if it's a justified execution or not. Yeah. And she literally doesn't care.
It's not like a modern execution of like lethal injection or whatever. It's a head chop off medieval, spectacle. I mean, yes, medieval people did watch that. Yes, it was a form of entertainment. That is completely true. If the character that I'm following, the point of view that I'm following is a character that enjoys watching people lose their heads,
that's going to make us feel a certain way.
Yeah, that's going to make me feel like this is not a person that I would enjoy sitting down with and inviting into my home.
But again, that's subjective. There is a fan base out there. So the reason why I'm bringing this up and the reason why I'm putting this caveat on it, I am not saying that it is wrong for this writer to have Jane love watching people die. I'm not saying that at all. If that's the character, if that's what they're doing, I'm just like the girl that wrote the sex scene between the brother and sister that she didn't realize she was writing a sex scene between the brother and sister. I'm more pointing it out. And if the author goes, no, that's exactly this. Jane is just a horrible human being. She's just irredeemable. And that's where we start. And either she becomes redeemable later on, or she's the villain and I'm just getting you a little bit inside of her head or whatever. That's your call as the author to decide these things. However, if Jane isn't that type of character and you didn't realize that by adding these lines in, you're going to make the reader see her in that light. Now we've brought up an issue that you go, oh yeah, no, she's not that type of person. She's the type of person up above where she has a mouth that would kill children, but she would never allow it to happen. And since she's in full control, she would never allow that to happen. She has to be on this mount because it's a tool and it's dangerous, but she's in control of it. And so she would never let it get out. That's the type of character this is. And I made a mistake here, making the readers feel that she is this despicable person. Then now you can adjust that. Otherwise you can go, nope, that's exactly what I was trying to do. You're feeling what I want you to feel. I'm so happy that you think she's a horrible person because at this moment in the story, she is an absolutely horrible person. Then you've succeeded. That's all we're saying. We're not saying change this.
I mean, otherwise it is an okayish paragraph. It's got some tells and
still got a lot of tell, and it's still got a lot of info dumping. And that's, I think, the writer's biggest problem through these 3 pages is everything is fact. I'm not going to, so this is a weird concept to kind of both teach and to understand. When you're giving facts to the reader, you want to do it instead of just laying out facts. And I'm talking about world building stuff. I'm not talking about like, it was a bright sunny day. The wind blew in from the west in a cooling, like those are just facts too, but those are just things. What I'm talking about is like, there's no holidays today. this is a little bit better way to do it. Jane didn't recall any holidays this month. And so that's why instead of, and she'd know, and I guess they're saying that she would know everything about holidays. I think that's what the author is trying to say in this sentence.
I think you could just lose it though and still retain
You could,
that.
or if you want to make sure that you don't confuse anybody, you could add, and she knew every holiday or something like that. But now you got double holidays, but whatever.
I made it, and she knew the feast days.
Right.
Giving it a little different flavor.
Every line has to not only give me the information that actually gives me depth into the story, character, plot, whatever, but it also has to be at the right time. So let's chase a rabbit here for a second. This line now, this new way. Jane didn't recall any holidays this month, and she knew every feast day, or she knew all the feast days or whatever. What you're trying to do is you're trying to put in a little information to the reader of, hey, Jane does a job or has a life or has a background where she actually is connected to holidays, to religious events, to whatever. That's kind of what I feel like this line is doing. But does the reader need that information now? And will they even understand it now? So in other words, does it actually impact the reader enough for me to give that extra piece of data? And so that's why I like the just cut it. Jane didn't recall any holidays this month, or as far as Jane knew, there was no holidays this month or whatever, because trying to show me that she's some type of priestess or has some connection to religion or has some connection to making calendars or holidays, I'm not there yet as the reader. And so the reason why I bring this up is, and the reason why I talked to the writer who did this last night was, you have to remember, you know everything as the writer, but when you're doling that information out to the reader, you have to take it back to what I said at the beginning of this. It is still a linear way of getting information. So you know she's a priestess, you know she builds calendars or makes holidays, or she's the goddess of holidays or whatever, but the reader doesn't yet. You have to think about when is the right time to get that information to them. We're still only in the third paragraph. We can't even see the town yet as the reader. So does this information actually impact the story at the level that I want it to as the writer in this moment? Subjective. You might say yes. The author may be listening to this and going, no, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to show that I want to show that she has some connection to religion. If you're doing it on purpose, then great. My thing is always to ask the question of every sentence, especially in my opening page, are you the right sentence for this moment in time for the reader? Because the reader is learning this world one sentence at a time.
Yeah. And
so that to me is very, very important, as opposed to me just dumping a bunch of information at the reader as fast as I can get it to them.
So Jane didn't recall any holidays this month, full stop. That it doesn't need any more than that. And then it's an execution then, that must have been it. No, that must be it. You don't need the must have been it, because it's all happening kind of past tense, but now.
That's present tense, unfortunately. So have been, first of all, is past perfect tense. So that's wrong, because it is happening in the now of the story, but the now of the story is happening in past tense. So that's really weird. And I even said this last night. Past perfect is used for things that happen before the now of the past tense story.
Yes.
But the now of the past tense story still has to be written in past tense, or you shift to present tense, which actually shifts tense. So that must be it is present tense.
Okay.
So that must be what it was. It's a rough line. And why do we need the qualifier? Again, this goes back to what I just said, asking every sentence why you exist. Do we need anything more than her thinking an execution then?
Actually, you're right. We can just cut this whole line.
Right.
This whole line can go.
Do we actually need to qualify that? But have been would mean that it happened before she rode into town.
Yes. So an execution then, everyone loved an execution, even her. At least this grisly Hamlet would provide entertainment. So I do feel that I have to say, because again, I know that this is very true to a kind of medieval time period. But medieval time periods didn't have constructs either. And we're not writing for a medieval audience. We're writing for a modern audience.
Right.
So while it is in keeping with a medieval time period to have executions as a form of entertainment, it's not that relatable to your audience.
So if I'm writing this and I know that Jane is not this type of person, but I want to make sure that the audience knows that people watched executions and they actually found it very entertaining, I might write something like, while everyone loved an execution, it was something that always sat, bad in Jane's mind or whatever. And then I'm now separating Jane from the throng of what this world is, so that, because again, Jane is the construct that the reader needs to connect to. And that's only if Jane is that type of character. Again, if Jane is a piece of crap, despicable character who loves watching people die, then this is perfect. We're illuminating this one sentence to make sure that the writer and everybody who's listening to this understand that when you do stuff like this, it is absolutely going to make the reader feel something. This line makes a reader feel something about this character. So we've gone way long on this one, and we're only 3 paragraphs in, but that's kind of what happened the last time when we were looking at your stuff. This stuff, we really want to explain it. We really want to go into detail so that we're not just popping it, but you actually understand kind of the thought process behind it. And so, yeah, we didn't edit this one like we line edited the last piece, but this one has some really big concepts, some really big things. We're talking about scene openings, scene beginnings, connecting the reader to the character, what we're going to look at when that camera turns on, what we're going to focus on, how we're going to roll information. And so these are big, really esoteric topics. And yes, they're subjective. And yes, it's up to the writer to make these decisions. If you're doing it on purpose, because you've made the choice to do it this way, then you're golden. When I say you're golden, I mean you're golden in the fact that you did it the way you wanted to do it. It doesn't mean you're golden in that you're going to be successful, because tons of things will still just, a bunch of people read it and everybody will give it 1 star and they'll hate it. So you never know until it gets out there. That's why you need beta readers. That's why you need to be in a writer's group. That's why you need to ask people, okay, did you like this? Do you like Jane? And if you're in a writer's group with 8 or 10 other people that all basically read what you read and are all fans of what you kind of are fans of, and every one of them are like, or 8 out of the 10 of them are like, actually, no, I don't like Jane and I probably wouldn't read this. That's if they're already your target market and they're telling you that they don't like it, it doesn't matter that you like Jane. It doesn't matter that you like this, the way this rolls out. If your target readership is telling you up front, yeah, we're not going to read this, then why are you writing it? Are you just writing it for your own edification? Then great. But don't publish it, because the readership has already told you that they're not going to like it. So that's why you have to get this tested out. You have to have beta readers. You have to have, you use that website. Give that website that you use.
critiquecircle.com.
So that is a site, if I understand correctly,
site
that you can put up stuff for critique and you can critique other people.
So what Critique Circle allows you to do is it allows you to critique other people's work and put your own stuff up. And you don't know anybody on there. It has the anonymity of the internet. So you can literally be as harsh as you like with a criticism. And if you receive harsh criticism, you know that the person on the other end of it does not know you. So they are literally just critiquing your work, not you.
If you Google writers groups, you're going to find one in your area, and that might not be a good one, and stay away from bad writers groups because they will hurt you more than help you. But look for them, and if you can't find one locally, there are tons online. This writer has come up with some really imaginative, really cool things.
I like
They've just missed making me care about them.
And I think on that note, we will see you soon for another episode.
Keep writing.
Hi guys, this is Marie from Releasing Your Inner Dragon, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you're interested in more content on fantasy world building, head over to YouTube and look up Just in Time Worlds. I release tons of content there. If you'd like to check out my book, The Hidden Blade by Marie M. Mullaney, it is available as an ebook, audiobook, and print book on Amazon. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.
Hey guys, Drake here. Thank you so much for listening to Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast. I hope you're getting a ton of information and maybe even some nuggets of gold that you can take into your own writing to help you on your journey of story creation. A couple things I want to throw at you. First of all, for the first time in years, I am opening myself up to being a private mentor again. If you would like for me to work with you to improve your writing right now, reach out to me. You can either go to my website, maxwellalexanderdrake.com, and send me a contact form, or just email me at author@maxadrake.com. Also, as many of you may know, I've been out of the novel game for quite a few years. I was the lead fiction writer for EverQuest Next from Sony. I've been in the movie and TV industry for a few years now, but I am excited to say I'm back into the novel game. I've actually been working on a novel for a little while now, and I'm going to start dropping it on Amazon's Zavella. So if you're on that platform, look me up, Maxwell Alexander Drake. Thank you again for listening, and as always, keep writing.